have a separate target for your branded shopping compared to your branded search. On search, typically it's 1, maybe 2 or 3 listings on the search side of things. Typically it's underneath the shopping listings, and shopping listings can have 9+ competitors all in a row on your brand terms, right? You don't see as many people bidding on search for your brand these days. Therefore, you're not as worried about sharing that space with someone who's going to steal your click share. Whereas on the shopping side of things, because you don't tell Google, hey, this is the exact term I want to target, Google understands through your feed, your search terms, what you offer. It will more commonly show up on competitors. So that's where you want to be a bit more considerate about, okay, I think a decent chunk of this traffic would not come through our organic listing and would go to potentially our other competitors if we weren't in this placement.
Wondering what 100 influencers talking about your brand could do to your bottom line? Meet Sorrel, the influencer platform that brands are using to get a 5 to 7x median ROAS on their influencer spend. As ad costs rise, it's time to build robust marketing moats with authentic creator partnerships. Sorrel automates and simplifies the entire process from finding influencers to contacting them, shipping products, and turning them into affiliates. Sorrel's G2 rating is 4.8, and the brands are loving their customer happiness team that will help you set things up from scratch even if you have no experience with influencers. Ready for a simpler, more effective approach to influencer marketing? DTC Podcast listeners enjoy a special offer. Double the trial length for free at no annual commitment. Start today at getsorrel.com/champions/DTC-newsletter. It's all killer, no filler. I'm Eric. This is Dougie, our Pilothouse Google team lead. We're going to talk about a topic today. It's near and dear to my heart. We talk about it on a lot of the podcasts, which is people's position on branded search. We got the do's and don'ts of branded search. So, Dougie, welcome to the podcast. What's your first big do for branded search?
The first big do, I guess, is to think critically about branded search in the first place. I hop on a lot of calls with people when I'm doing audits or just chatting generally with brands, and there's kind of a few categories people fall into. They either say, hey, I don't want to spend on brand at all because that traffic is already looking for me. I don't want to pay for it, whatever, right? I hear that a ton. Totally understand the mentality behind it. You also get people who are like, hey, it's super high intent. Therefore, I want all that traffic. Give me it all. I want to spend 100% of brand. It's getting me a 20 ROAS, whatever. That looks great. Then you've got people who have kind of set an arbitrary target. And I would say the people in the middle are probably the closest to finding the right answer. Ultimately, my position is that you want to find the incrementality of your branded traffic, and that will vary from brand to brand based on a few factors. But we don't want to just say, hey, we want it all, or hey, we want none of it. We want to think, okay, what percentage of this branded traffic is going to be incremental and have an important impact to our business, and then make some decisions from there.
Sounds like a complex mathematical equation. I think I may have sent you a video. I think I saw a TikTok of someone actually doing like a dissertation on trying to figure that number out, because like the other key factor is all these platforms, whether it's Google or even Amazon ads, they're launching these different ways of automating your ads, whether it's through AI or not. And one of the themes I'm seeing recurring is that a lot of these automations will take too many, it will be too aggressive on the easy conversions to prove that they're winning. And so they'll basically bring in branded search into their algorithms, maybe more than they should, to take more credit.
Yeah, it's 100% the case. You saw that with the launch of PMax within Google, right? You launched PMax. There was initially no real way to exclude any branded traffic. There was a huge pushback on that. Google eventually walked it back, and now you can add brand exclusions. I'm a huge proponent for segmenting all branded traffic from your non-branded traffic. The intent difference is just too significant. You need to have separate targets and goals laid out for brand than you do for non-brand, right? So you're absolutely right in that some of the additional automation that's going to continue to be pushed, you have to do the best you can to make sure that you're segmenting through brand exclusions and PMax. There's other ways around it as well, making sure you've got negative keyword coverage, all the like. But generally, we want to make sure that those two buckets are very much distinct from each other and have different targets assigned to them.
So that's another big do. Make sure you're
Another big do.
segmenting it and treating it on its own merits and not letting it give you rose-colored glasses on other things.
Absolutely, and you see it all the time. I'll hop into an account and I'll look at a non-branded search campaign, or I'll look at Performance Max, and you look through the search terms and the insights, and it's brand, and you've got a target for that campaign aligned with your non-branded performance, right? Which doesn't make sense. Google is obviously going to push into whatever is going to drive it the most conversions if we're using automated bidding, which typically I advise for the most part in many cases. With brand, I actually do advise some testing into some more manual bid strategies, just because the intent's already there. You don't necessarily need Google to tell you that a search for your brand is likely to convert and we want to bid on that term. We want to think critically about how much do we want to bid on brand. If we were to cut our branded spend or hold out our branded spend, how much of that for each particular keyword might come through organic? Run that analysis using GA4, using Search Console to get a bit of insight there. And then you can start to look at, okay, these particular terms, even though they're branded, you might have a search for your core branded term. That might have a lower impact on your incrementality than something, say, for brand term reviews or brand term versus other brand, right? Because those people are clearly in more of a analytical phase. They're not actively looking just for us. They're trying to do a bit more research, understand what we do, if we're most relevant to their particular purchase, that kind of thing, right? So it's not just that all keywords within brand have the exact same level of intent. Just like non-brand, you've got differing levels of intent behind that search as well.
And then what does this look like practically? Like what does the anatomy of a branded Google search campaign kind of look like? And is it just those degrees of ad sets that are different, that are weighted differently?
Yeah, so what I really like doing on the search side, and I'll speak to the shopping / PMAX side as well, because those are the two major components of the results page, right? You'll get typically the shopping results on top or on the side, and then the search listings underneath. So shopping is actually potentially a greater impact and consideration than the search results. But on the search side, I do like to have a core term, so just the brand name typically, because it tends to drive the vast majority of your branded volume, traffic, and conversions. And run that in a separate campaign with separate bids associated with it, either target impression share with manual CPC cap or just manual CPC on its own. Again, you can run with automated bidding. I like automated bidding, but for brand, the intent's already there. I think we can control that a little bit more granularly. So running the core term in a separate campaign is what I really have seen strong results from. Then you can kind of manipulate the impression share, balance that with what you're seeing on the organic side through GA4 and Search Console, and kind of work your way to an optimal level from there. And then from the non-core terms that are potentially a bit more incremental, still branded, we like to look at that through a different lens and have a different target associated with it. Again, similarly, exploring manual CPC or target impression share, but there is some potential component for automated bidding depending on the results you're seeing. But for sure, having that segmentation on search between your core terms and your non-core terms is something I absolutely advise.
What are some other categories of those non-core terms? You mentioned reviews, I think. What else fits into there? And then what about competition, actually bidding on other people's brands? Or is that a whole other podcast?
I could touch on it for sure. The promos, absolutely. So you'll get a lot of people looking for X brand discount code or X brand promo. So those certainly take on a slightly separate level of intent behind them. Again, reviews, comparisons, all the like. Product names as well tend to have a slightly different tied intent to them. So we tend to segment those out as well. When we look at competitors bidding on our terms, that's an influencing factor for how much we want to spend on our brand, right? I typically don't see a ton of success these days going through strict branded search and bidding on competitors. Through shopping, absolutely. Through YouTube even, absolutely. But search, because it's tied to the relevancy, if that brand is bidding on their term, we're just going to inflate our CPCs to the moon. You can maybe, if you're the big fish in the small pond, you can kind of monopolize that a little bit. But if you're a growing brand or middling brand and you're trying to capitalize on competitor intent, especially if they're the big players in the space, you're not going to have a good time. You're not going to get a ton of conversions. You're going to get charged $10 a click. It's not really worth it. So there are better ways of going about competitor targeting.
So that's don't.
That's a don't. Yeah. Or be very careful if you are going to do so. There are corner cases, absolutely, but generally don't expect to say, hey, this competitor is super relevant to me, but I think I do it better. I'm going to bid on them. If they're bidding on their terms, and even if they're not, the relevancy factor is going to impact your CPCs. Again, if you're a big fish in a small pond, maybe you can do that. If you're a small fish in a big pond, that would not be my first area of recommendation.
You mentioned comparisons. What about like this brand versus my brand versus this brand? Is that like, where does that fall into the strategy?
Yeah, so that's certainly one that will typically be a little bit more competitive, and it's worth exploring. And again, setting a potentially higher CPC cap because it has that potential for more incremental value. Or if you do go down the route of testing automated bidding on your non-core terms, then you've got a potentially lower TCPA or TROAS, higher TCPA, lower TROAS target associated with it. So again, it's just understanding that even within brand, you're going to have differing levels of intent, trying to utilize your GA4 and your Search Console to determine, okay, how much of this traffic would come through otherwise. It's not an easy thing, but you can start to kind of get a bit, put the pieces of the puzzle together by kind of cross-referencing those other tools and aligning the specific kind of clusters of branded terms to what you see to be impacting your business the most, right? If we run a holdout test, so you exclude Texas, let's say, from your branded terms, and you exclude them from all your core terms and your non-core terms, and then you look at Search Console, you can kind of see the increase over time for those specific terms coming through organic, right? And you can kind of see, okay, maybe my core term, I got 95% of it. Great. Maybe it doesn't make a ton of sense to continue bidding on the core term, but maybe some of these competitor terms like us versus them or promo or reviews or what have you, maybe none of those came back through or very few. And then you want to consider, okay, this is traffic that, yes, they're still searching for me, but they might not come through otherwise. Therefore, we have to think critically about the CPCs we're trying to target here or our general targets for those non-core terms.
What about misspellings? Do you have a category for those in your non-core brand ones?
I would say it's actually a common question I get on those audits. In the past, it was more common to have misspellings. Nowadays, with Google's match types being a bit broader, even exact match being not really exact match, Google does a really good job these days of tackling those misspellings. So typically it just leads to redundancy. I do it on occasion if I am seeing that certain terms aren't picking up certain misspellings, but generally you have to do less of that these days than you would have in the past.
What about the ad? Like, what about the ad and the ad extensions itself on branded campaigns? So my mind goes to the ad extensions, and then also to the post-click experience and whether you're mixing that up on the branded search.
I think the bigger piece certainly lies within understanding the incrementality of the terms. I will say that if someone's looking for your brand and they see a listing with your brand title in the ad, they're pretty likely to come through and click. And depending on the nature of the term, you might want to send them to a PDP or a homepage. I would say for core terms, we're typically sending to the homepage, right? And for product-specific terms, we tend to try and send to that particular product. So it's just aligning to the understanding behind the search, right? If someone's looking for your brand name and then a particular category, maybe you want to send them to the collections page, right? Absolutely still test your homepage versus collections versus product page, etc. But generally you can get an idea behind the search to make sure that you're delivering a cohesive message from the ad copy and delivering to a relevant landing page. The ad copy tends to be a bit more branded than some of the non-branded stuff, right? Your relevancy is already there. You just want to speak to who you are as a brand. You've got pretty limited space. There's not as much of a pull to make sure that we're speaking in a very specific way to a non-branded term. You have the ability to be a bit more branded for sure, because again, the relevancy is already there. I would say make sure that the extensions are built out, if nothing else, just to take up real estate right on the SERP.
Nice. I've taken us far afield of our do's and don'ts structure. So what other do's or don'ts do you have to highlight?
Yeah, I would say part of the do's side of things would be to have a separate target for your branded shopping compared to your branded search. Again, when you think about the opportunity on search, typically it's 1, maybe 2 or 3 listings on the search side of things. Typically it's underneath the shopping listings, and shopping listings can have 9+ competitors all in a row on your brand terms, right? You don't see as many people bidding on search for your brand these days. So the search impression share is typically owned by you, or if you're running Amazon, a bit of Amazon as well. Therefore, you're not as worried about sharing that space with someone who's going to steal your click share. Whereas on the shopping side of things, because you don't tell Google, hey, this is the exact term I want to target, Google understands through your feed, through your search terms, kind of what you offer. It will more commonly show up on competitors. So that's where you want to be a bit more considerate about, okay, I think a decent chunk of this traffic would not come through our organic listing and would go to potentially our other competitors if we weren't in this placement. So having potentially a different target, both for click costs and for return on shopping compared to search, even within brand, I think is worth digging into, because again, they are pretty different in terms of their level of competitiveness. And these competitors might not even be trying to bid on your terms, right? We work with a ton of brands and they're like, hey, my reseller is showing up on our terms and they signed a waiver and said they weren't going to do that. And usually it's through no ill intent, right? They've set up a campaign, they've attached all their products, and Google understands this is relevant, so it tries to serve. So I would say make sure that you're keeping in mind the fact that shopping is certainly more competitive than search, even more so on non-brand, but even still within brand.
Any big don'ts?
Big don'ts, again, tied to the incrementality side. Don't just say, hey, we want it all, or hey, we want none of it, or set a random target for the sake of setting a random target and it looking good. I would say the don'ts tie to making sure you're thinking critically about the targets you're setting for CPCs and return, and also think critically about how that comes back down and impacts your organic, right? So it comes down to understanding incrementality. Again, I think those people who set an arbitrary target are a little bit closer than those who say do it all or don't at all. But again, you want to dig deeper, and especially for smaller brands that have limited budget in many of these scenarios, every dollar you spend matters. So you want to make sure it's a dollar that's going to drive a meaningful sale and not a sale that's going to come through anyway. So I would say that piece and the segmentation piece is certainly one worth considering, making sure that you're not getting in your search campaigns or your PMAX campaigns a ton of branded traffic saying, oh, things look great, trying to ramp up and scale, and then all of a sudden Google's trying to scale into brand and you're inflating your CPCs, right? Let's have that be very segmented, because the intent is just so vastly different.
Are there any, I know it's going to be a different case by case basis, but are there any rules of thumb to like the kind of like lift in ROAS you're looking for instance, from a core branded campaign versus a outside branded campaign versus a regular prospecting campaign?
Yeah, I would say it does just depend on so many factors, with competitiveness in the niche, with your business goals, right? Like there are some brands out there who they have enough money that they're going to throw it all at the wall and just be happy that they're getting all the traffic, whatever. And that's fine. I think you can absolutely be more efficient and think about things more critically, but some people just have all the money in the world and whatever. I would say that there isn't a one size fits all. You need to get X kind of return from core, X kind of return from non-core. Again, run this kind of analysis so that you can make a critical decision that's tied to your brand and not tied to what someone on the internet says you need
Dougie randomly shouted out on all killer, no filler.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to do something custom to your brand.
100%. And again, the same question would be like, in terms of percentage of Google spent on budget, is that again just a totally answer that's like totally depends, or is there ever way too much that you're spending on brand?
Yeah, I would say likely if you're trying to get the most incrementality out of Google, it typically doesn't lie within brand. So while we're having this conversation about brand, like our focus really, after we've gone through these motions and continue to monitor it, because it will change over time as well. You don't want to just set it at one level and then say, hey, that's it, we're good. Brand can sit on the side and do the same thing forever, right? You want to kind of monitor over time, because maybe a new competitor will come in, start bidding on your terms, or maybe your organic listings will improve or decrease over time, and therefore that will impact the incrementality. So yeah, there's a few considerations there. I would say there isn't like, oh, you need to spend only up to 50% on non-brand or 70% or whatever. I would say that your focus needs to be on the non-branded side if you want to focus on whatever's going to be most incremental to you. And I think that that's a surprisingly refreshing perspective when I talk to brands. I think they intrinsically understand that and feel that way. But I talk to these people, and these people being other brands that we're doing audits for and chatting with and exploring opportunity with. And so many times they're like, yes, that's what we want to hear. But to date, all we've done is brand, right? And so, yes, the incrementality lies within non-brand, but you also don't want to just say branded is fully incremental or fully non-incremental, because there is a middle ground there that varies in influence from brand to brand. So no, I'm not going to say 50% brand, 50% non-brand, but I will say you want to have as much of a push into non-brand as you feel you can make, given the incrementality that you've seen within your branded side of things. So
it's where the scale lives. So you're going to make, in a perfect world, you're making your branded spend smaller and smaller because you're finding profitable spend at top of funnel through all these other crafty methods we like to talk about on this podcast.
Yeah, and in theory, you're likely to scale both, right? As your business grows, more people will look for your business, right? So, but the other thing to think about is someone doesn't wake up and think, oh, I'm going to search this brand today, right? They might wake up and say, man, I need a brand new Art Deco chair or something, right? And you might want to put yourself in front of them, but they're not going to say, oh, I'm going to wake up and search IKEA today, because you've got to think about, again, the scale does come from the non-branded side. You can't scale to the moon through branded alone, because people don't find out about your brand through Google itself, right? Unless you're running some awareness or the non-branded piece. If you're just to run brand, you're capitalizing on intent that you've grown through organic, other paid channels, potentially other non-branded channels within Google, right? You don't kind of create that intent with brand.
I like it. As we were discussing the kind of person that just goes all out on brand spending and probably bids on competitors' terms, it reminds me of a character from my favorite movie, Daniel Plainview, where he's just like, I drink your milkshake. And I feel like that some people get up their backs up a little bit when when other people are bidding on your term, but gotta have some protection, gotta own it. But yeah, don't go overboard.
Yeah, just think critically in all things marketing, but specifically, like it goes all the way down. Like think critically about how you're spending between channels, how you're spending within Google, right? Like just ultimately take a step back and don't just apply one single rule and say this fits all, because you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is making the most meaningful impact for your business, and that especially accounts for when you're looking at where the next dollar of spend should be, or even how much should I be spending in certain places.
I love it. I think if people are out there and they take a little look at their Google campaigns and they think their brand spending is out of whack, they gotta get in touch with Dougie here. I think you could probably do an audit or something like that.
Oh, absolutely. I just love chatting with folks and seeing what they're up to and providing a bit of insight from my end. Right, like so many of these audit calls are actively enjoyable to me, whether they end up in business for us or not, because you get to share these insights, and I think that's just a fun way to go about things, and I enjoy having these chats. So
cool. Well, send us an email. Send me eric@directtoconsumer.co, or just email me. I'll be the pinch point here, but email me if you want one of these sweet Dougie audits. Dougie joined a fantasy hockey pool that I'm in this year and beat me in his very first year after going through a dispersion draft. So it was a little bit humbling, but glad to have you as part of the group there, Dougie.
Always happy to hop on and talk hockey as well. We're into an interesting NHL finals here.
That's right. Who do you like? Who do you like in the NHL? We don't get enough hockey content on this podcast. Who do you think, now that it's 3-2, do you think they're going to come storming back?
Oh, I'd love it. Like I've got so many connections to people who cheer for Edmonton. For them, I want it, right? I'm a big Leafs fan, so the last team and only team to do it was the 42 Leafs against the Red Wings, going down 3-0 and taking it 4-3. So I think it'd be historic, and therefore I'm really rooting for it. And also the Panthers are in my Leafs Atlantic division. I don't love them, so happy to see them kick to the curb. I won't say sense. I'm confident in the Oilers doing it, but I mean, got to feel like McDavid's going to win a cup at some point. He's chasing that playoff point title. I'd love to see him do it.
I've heard the take that from Toronto fans that they love the idea of McDavid winning because then he'll be like, I don't owe Edmonton anything anymore and I can go to Toronto where I've always wanted to be. I've heard that's a Fever Leafs dream.
Yeah, that's the classic Toronto pick me attitude. They want every big star that grew up in Toronto to come back to them. I would be very surprised if it happened. Would absolutely love for it to happen, but no, I think it'd just be a good story and good for hockey. So I'm rooting for that.
Well, I went to a Canucks game versus the Edmonton in the last series, and I got asked by CBC whether I would be cheering for Edmonton if they eliminated the Canucks. And I said yes, as like a nice, polite Canadian on Canadian national television. Now that it's actually happened, I'm a little salty, and I'm a little afraid of my Oilers friends that are fans and the chip on their shoulder they'll get if they're the team that brings it home. So I'm not looking forward to that as much, although you never know. You can't win them all. So
yeah,
here's to next season.
And I don't believe in the Bud Light campaign or Budweiser or whatever, or Boston Pizza. That's the one. It's like, hey, Canada, root for all Canadian teams. Like, I will never in my life I will actively root against any Habs team in the playoffs, right? Like, if they were in the finals, when they were in the finals a couple years ago. This is by far the most actively rooting
hockey
against
podcast we've ever snuck on the DTC podcast. So thanks so much for that, Dougie. This has been fun. Chat with you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're not getting the D2C newsletter, you can subscribe for free at directtoconsumer.co. And if you want to learn more about Pilothouse's all-killer, no-filler services, take off to pilothouse.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.